911 state emergency.
Hi, fire at 1397 Fountain Grove Parkway.
Do you see flames?
I'm trying to get there. I'm the executive director. It's assisted living and memory care. I've been redirected. I know we've been told to evacuate. I'm just trying to get in contact with somebody at the fire department or something to help evacuate those residents. I can't get there.
Let me get you over to the fire department. Hang on. I'll also tell Santa Rosa Police Department. Hang on real quick.
Thank you.
To an evacuation center, ma'am. At that point, we'll figure it out. Right now, you can see the flames in the distance over there. It's just not safe to be here.
Copy, George 5 requesting ambulance code 3 for elderly.
Not an ambulance. 25 souls need to be transported down from this hill. I need a bus.
San 22.
San 22.
Varenna. I'll give you an exact address. We have about 30 people in wheelchairs. We need a bus up here ASAP.
Copy. Activity 1401 Fountain Grove, and advise what part of the property they're in.
Any units available to help evacuate 1401 Fountain Grove Parkway?
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, I am honored to welcome three remarkable guests, Ann Belden, Paul Gullixson, and Beth Steffy. Ann and Paul are the authors of Inflamed, the book, and Beth is the daughter of a victim from this tragic situation. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate being here.
It's our pleasure. Real quick, before we start with the questions, I just want to have each of you just give a quick synopsis and introduction to the audience. I'll start with you, Ann.
Yeah, my name is Ann Belden. I run the journalism program at a college in Northern California. And I started this project about 5 years ago. I'm one of the co-authors of Inflamed.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Ann. And you're coming to us live from London this morning as well.
Yes, I am.
Next, we'll go to you, Paul.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning. I'm Paul Gullixson. I've been a journalist for 37 years. I was with the newspaper Press Democrat that was at the heart, covered this fire in 2017, and when the paper won a Pulitzer at that time. And I'm an author, and I teach part-time at Sonoma State University, and I'm a communications manager for the County of Sonoma now.
Thank you for being here, Paul. Next, Beth, we'll go to you.
Great. Hi, my name is Beth Steffy. I am a retired Hewlett-Packard marketing professional. And the reason I'm really here is that my mom actually lived at Villa Capri, and that's the story we're going to be talking about today. And what she went through kind of engaged me to become a senior safety advocate to make sure what happened to my mom doesn't happen to anybody else.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, all three of you, again, for being here today and for sharing this story with the world. I want to kind of start off with you, Paul. If you can kind of start sharing what Inflamed is all about, the setting, and what ended up being this tragic fire.
Yeah, so this is at its heart, it's a story about a catastrophic firestorm that swept through the wine country of California, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge by about an hour in Sonoma County. It swept through in 1917 in early October. And the story focuses around what happened at two rather high-end retirement complexes, an assisted living unit and an independent living complex, where the staff essentially abandoned the residents, and the managers did as well. Some never showed up, some came but left. And it was really left to, it's the dramatic story of these family members who came up there because they were worried about loved ones and hadn't heard whether they had left that site, and put their lives at risk while surrounded by flames, encroaching flames, to save these individuals. And it's also a story about the accountability that followed. And that's where Beth really comes in, because the owners, powerful owners of this complex, basically tried to suppress the truth, denied what happened, said staff were there the whole time and they weren't. And it resulted in state criminal investigations, and eventually they were held to some degree accountable to admit that they had lied about what happened there. And so that's the heart of the story.
Yeah. Anne, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I would go into a little more detail. So Paul mentioned that there are 2 senior living facilities in this complex. They're right next door to each other. Villa Capri was assisted living and memory care. There were 61 residents there that night. There were 4 staff of 4, 1 med tech, 3 caregivers. 2 of the 3 caregivers were on light duty. One was 8.5 months pregnant. The other was had an injured wrist, so they couldn't really lift people. And when the power went out and suddenly they found that, they were in the path of a ferocious firestorm, there was no emergency plan that they knew of, no evacuation plan. They didn't have working flashlights. They didn't have support from managers rushing to help. And I don't hold, and these people all, like every single one of them, left with residents in their charge at different points, but they were basically kind of abandoned as well. They were told by their executive director to basically stand by the doors because the power was out and people in memory care could walk right out the door. They also did not have the keys or know where the keys were to the buses parked out back that could have safely transported most of the residents. So they were just in a dire situation. And one of them actually stood up against the executive director's orders and said, we have to get people out of here. And they started bringing people out of their rooms. And that's when some family members arrived to help. And these family members could have just taken their parent and left, but they didn't. Even after, there's a maintenance director who showed up and found keys to, a van and a short bus, and those buses left, and the caregivers left with residents. These two of the women, Kathy Allen and Melissa Langels, absolute heroes. They stayed, they helped bring residents from their rooms. They actually, in our prologue, they get locked out of the building and fire is surrounding on 3 sides. The back of the building is on fire. The building itself is filled with smoke, and there are 24 residents locked inside, about 10 of them up on an upstairs landing in wheelchairs. Many of them were downstairs were from memory care, and they were, literally in an impossible situation and risked their lives at that point. I don't want to give away the whole story, but then up the hill at Varenna, which Paul wrote about, there was an executive director who was there for a while, and the executive director left, and employees left. There were some very heroic employees there as well. But basically some 80 residents were left without any employees. And a welder from Petaluma went to check on his grandfather. He blew through checkpoints. He was on the phone with his sister. She urged him to check on their grandfather. He pulled up. I mean, he drove over burning trees and got to the building. It was perfectly dark. He said, I think they must have taken them. Everyone assumed that the building had been evacuated. His sister urged him to check. He walked in the door and discovered a lobby full of elderly residents who said to him, "Are you the firefighter? Are you here to rescue us?" And this is kind of where our story, this is all in our prologue, so I'm not giving too much away, but he too risked his life. And turns out there were about 80 residents still there. And really we calculate about 105 elderly residents would have perished, but for the heroic efforts of some employees and family members that night. And this botched evacuation continued. It could have ended there right after the night. I don't want to give too much away, but the company then denied accountability, and they denied what happened. So this led to lawsuits and investigation by the Social Services Administration, or Department of Social Services, which called it like the worst case of senior neglect and abandonment that they'd ever seen. It led to the district attorney looking into the case, looking into possible criminal charges. And the corporation was able to kind of buy their way out of every situation so that the story was never fully told until our book.
Yeah, well, and I just want to jump in. Did this ever reach the Attorney General for California, or did it stay local?
The Attorney General's office of the state of California did assist the local district attorney's office in their investigation of the case after the state investigation. This was thoroughly investigated by the State Department of Social Services. There were some consequences and penalties rolled out to Oakmont Senior Living, the parent company of Villa Capri and Varenna. Only after that did the local district attorney look into possible criminal charges. After an investigation, there was a stipulated agreement reached with the owners of Oakmont Senior Living, whereby they were paying $500,000 in penalties and agreed to certain changes, reforms at the senior living complex. And the owner of the complex, Bill Gallagher, is a very powerful, wealthy individual in the state of California. He signed the agreement twice personally. And then 50 days later, he launched a recall campaign against the local district attorney. It was seen in the community as clearly vindictive. And the district attorney had already announced she was not running for re-election, and she was stepping down the next year. And yet they put the public through a very costly recall campaign. And the story, that's why we say the story is a detailed hour-by-hour account retelling of what happened the night of the fire, but then it also goes into the investigations and the battle for accountability and truth afterward, and goes all the way through the recall campaign. So it's really devolves into a community battle for truth and knowing what happened up there.
Right. I don't know if it's fair to say or to label it, but it seems like we're learning about some of the villains of this case, and you've mentioned heroics and heroes. Who are some of the heroes, Paul, in your mind in this story?
Well, one, Anne referenced him a little bit, but is a guy by the name of R.J. Kissling, who got in his pickup truck at the encouragement of his sister to go check on their grandfather who lived at Varenna. And he drove through fire, down branches, went around the barricades, was initially told that Varenna and Villa Capri had already been evacuated at the time. This fire was a monstrous firestorm. It was sweeping through the community and people were fleeing. And yet he's driving on the opposite side of the highway going north while everybody else is fleeing south, and goes into the teeth on the fire. And he's not very reassured by this officer at the barricade. So he ends up going around the barricade, drives through burning branches and smoke. It gets to Varenna. It's dark. He calls his sister, says, look, I told you they were probably evacuated already. And she says, look, go check, make sure. So he puts on his headlamp, goes in the lobby. And that's when there's 30 or so seniors gathered there all alone. And one of them gets up and says to him, are you the firefighters? Are you here to save us? And at that point, the fire is surrounding the complex. And so, yeah, I don't want to insinuate that the employees there didn't do anything. There were some Scout employees, but most of them were frontline workers. Health aides. We had a couple of maintenance workers at Varenna who stayed behind. There's a dramatic story of a guy named Andre who stayed behind to help this woman who was left behind in one of the buildings, and she was in a wheelchair. She had a blind German Shepherd, and he's trying to get her down these flight of stairs, and he runs outside to try to find a staff member to help him, and he runs up to one of the staffers and said, can you help me get Adele Burton is her name, and says, can we help me get her down from upstairs? She's in a wheelchair. I need help. And there's smoke everywhere. And the woman looks at him and said, Andre, save yourself. And she ran away. And I don't want to give away too much, but I can tell you, Andre is one of the heroes of this story. He did not leave. He was not going to leave that woman up there. And I think that's really at the heart of the story. It's a story of heroes. It's a story of people who go beyond the call of duty, put their lives at risk to help strangers in many cases in times of trouble. And then at the same contrast, there's also people who are in positions of responsibility and neglected their responsibility, turned and fled, and in some cases made up excuses later on. Or in the case of the executive director of Villa Capri, we don't know where she was. She said she was on their way there, and we still to this day, after all the research Ann and I did, we still don't know where she was for 6 hours, and it's still not clearly explained.
Wow. And did you have any personal people that you would call out as heroes of the story?
Well, I spoke about Kathy and Melissa Langels and Kathy Allen, the women who stayed at Villa Capri, got locked out, tried, could have left, could have gotten into Melissa's car and left. They met that night, total strangers to each other, but they stayed with the last 24. And Villa Capri did burn down. The building did burn down, and Kathy Allen stayed till the very, very end. The other people who got a bad rap is the caregivers at Villa Capri, and they were they've been near and dear to my heart because they were very traumatized. Annette, 8.5 months pregnant, she rode in this first Sprinter van with 8 residents down and got dropped off. A sheriff's deputy actually showed up to pick up his grandmother and ended up driving a van with 8 residents and this pregnant Annette, who was very worried about all the smoke she was breathing. She got dropped off at a county building not far from where the fire was devouring a mobile home park and closing in on a nearby hospital. She was left in a parking lot with these elderly residents. Cynthia drove through basically a firestorm with residents in her car, very traumatized. She got all turned around, could not talk about this night without just lots of tears. All of them were so traumatized. And there's one named Elizabeth Lopez who stood up to the executive director's orders and said, we're not going to guard the doors. We need, I'm going home tonight. We need to rescue these people. We need to get them ready for transport out of here. They, I think, were, faced as bravely as they could this dire situation. But, what Kathy and Melissa did at Villa Capri, there's no comparison. There were also residents at Varenna, a gentleman named Bob Mitten, who showed police, knocked down doors with police. there were other residents who rose to the occasion as well.
Just before we move on, just out of curiosity, you mentioned the sheriff's deputy who came to pick up his grandmother.
Yeah.
When he pulled up, was he not aware of the crisis happening with everyone else? Or was it just, I'm picking up grandma and I leave and I'm not giving any thought? Like what was his thought?
I think he was trying to, like, you have to understand, this fire was fierce. It had taken down cell towers. There was no power. It was very difficult for anyone to communicate. And he, at that point, a maintenance director had shown up and gotten the keys to this one van and just said, "Will you drive this?" He actually tried to take the van. He's the one who left the pregnant Annette in the parking lot and went back up there to try and rescue more. And he was met by a wall of fire. He thought everyone had died. And then he almost died. He literally could have died. And he too was very traumatized. And we learned his story from a deposition that we can tell you about.
Paul, geographically, people might be thinking, California, West Coast, they get the huge wildfires. We're in Michigan, where I'm at. We don't really get any of the real severe, weather situations like hurricanes, earthquakes, occasional tornado. Why does this matter? Why should somebody outside of, a California, a Texas, one of the coastal states with a hurricane, why should they be concerned, or why should this matter to them?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say, this was not, in the wilds of California. This was a very heavily populated area. I mean, it did go through some forested areas when it traveled from Calistoga to Santa Rosa, but it was fed by very intense high winds, and it was and with the dry conditions at the time, drought, it was a perfect conditions, and it devastated this area. The Tubbs fire alone took out more than 5,000 homes in Santa Rosa, and it's or 5,000 total, 3,000 in Santa Rosa itself, and some of that was flat residential areas, normal blue collar neighborhoods with schools and everything, and it skipped the highway at one point, and so that alone is something all communities can be concerned about. But really, this is a cautionary tale, if you will, about how ready we are for these catastrophic natural events, whether they're wildfires, hurricanes, heat domes, whatever they may be. In many cases, our retirement complexes themselves are not set up or not prepared for these kinds of natural disasters. Many of them, as with Varenna and Capri, they don't have evacuation plans in order. Some of them are still sort of shelter in place. Let's keep everybody in their rooms, and sometimes that can be the worst thing you want to do, such as in this case. And it's scary because we do have, every day we have 10,000 more baby boomers turning 65, and more of them. Some of them have incredible wealth from the properties. They have a lot of principal in their properties. They want to go live in some of these retirement complexes, and some of them are beautiful, and they're not all problematic, no doubt, but some of them, like Varenna and Villa Capri, are Titanics. They have very nice chandeliers, nice dining rooms, beautiful furniture, but they don't have enough lifeboats, if you will. They're just not set up for the worst case scenarios, and that's the warning that we want to send people, because we've seen some of these same cases in other places, whether the fires in Maui, the fires in Camp Fire, the hurricanes we've had, where more often than not, it's our senior citizens who are most vulnerable, and some of them are in some of our high-end retirement complexes.
Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the assisted living industry is a highly profitable industry without federal oversight. And there is a state-by-state patchwork of laws that govern assisted living with varying degrees of enforcement. And there are stories, all the time coming out about problems in assisted living. it's an industry ripe with high turnover of employees. It's difficult work, and these for-profit companies often don't pay employees enough to stay. So when you have a constant turnover of work, how do you train people for emergencies that may befall them? And we're seeing these climate disasters in places that don't normally get them.
Well, and just to follow up on that too, I feel like because it's a for-profit model, it's not regulated, that there's also no incentive to properly staff it. A lot of times they're keeping staff lower because it's a higher profit margin. That's why you get workers that are burnt out, or you have that high turnover because they're, resident to staff ratio is untenable. If you're taking care of 15 people and you're one person, what kind of quality are you able to provide to begin with? What I wanted to ask, though, before I go on to you, Ann, for the next question, throughout litigation and throughout your research, did you ever discover if they had an emergency preparedness plan in place or training?
Well, so at Villa Capri, the executive director said there was an emergency plan in a binder, but the only copy of it burned down, and none of the employees were aware that it existed. She said she admitted under oath that she had been working on an evacuation plan. There were monthly training sessions, and this was an important point. These were night shift workers. They had monthly training in the afternoon. So you work all night, then you're expected to come in once a month, and they had learned things like how to use a fire extinguisher. They had been given a handout on how to do a 3-person or 2-person carry of someone in a wheelchair downstairs, but they'd never actually practiced it. There were no fire drills. There were no fire drills that involved residents. So you could have even if they had the greatest plan, if the staff isn't trained to it, and there's no drills, it's not a plan.
Yeah, well, and to further that point, as you mentioned, the 2 aides that were on that night are both on light duty, so even if they had been trained, they couldn't have done it anyhow, right?
Right. Correct.
And your background is in journalism and, writing and teaching. What got you involved with this story?
Well, I was fascinated by this story, and I had read actually a column that Paul had written, and Paul and I go way back. We worked together a few decades ago. I don't want to give away our ages, on the San Francisco Peninsula, but I was drawn to this story, and I had a student who had helped report on the fires during this 2-week period where fires were burning everywhere in 2017. And she was making a documentary on the emergency response aspect of the fire. And she asked me to find people who had interesting stories to tell. So this story had stuck in my head. I called up Melissa Langels, one of the women who had gone to Villa Capri that night. And on camera, I conducted the interview. And Roberta, my former student, Melissa was obviously incredibly traumatized. We were all in tears. And then at the end of this, Melissa showed me a new website that Oakmont Senior Living had just put up that purported to tell their version of the story because they were getting bad press, and there was a lawsuit that was about to potentially could go to trial. And one of the questions read, did family members evacuate all residents? And the website said there was a team effort led by staff with help from family members, which we greatly appreciated. So I read this out loud in front of Melissa, and she said, yeah, that's BS. And that's when I knew that there was more to this story. Melissa put me in touch with Beth. And I called Paul, who had since left the Press Democrat, and said, hey, you want to work on an article or two? I did not tell him I didn't know it was going to turn into a 400+ page book and 5 years of intense work. But eventually, early on in the process, we got our hands on depositions from the first lawsuit. And these were depositions of the employees, of the managers, even of the corporate owner himself before they were sealed. And they were just a goldmine of information. And so we started putting together what I refer to as a 10,000 piece puzzle, trying to figure out what happened hour by hour. We, at some point, wrote a book proposal, which was picked up by Permuted Press. I had a book agent at the time, and the book came out in last October.
Yeah. Paul, go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to add that the reason that these depositions have been sealed because this case, the first civil case, went all the way to the basically the night before it went to trial, and then the owners of this the complex basically settled at the last minute, and then they asked to seal all the sorry, they went to they settled the night before the trial started, and then they asked to seal all the depositions because they didn't want this story getting out. And so we were able to get a hold of the depositions, and they were a font of information. We were able to get a hold of depositions before they were sealed, and there was a great deal of insight as to what happened during those nights. But the reason I got involved is because when I was at the Press Democrat, I was a columnist. I was writing about what happened at Villa Capri and Varenna, but I knew we were only scratching the surface. That there was so much more going on, and at the time, Oakmont Senior Living was denying what happened, and then we were already so much chaos going on with the fire that it was hard to focus on just this one story. 6 months later, I had left the paper. I was working at Sonoma State University full time at that point, and Anne reached out to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about crawling into this issue a little more and doing some more investigation?" And I said, "Sure." I was missing investigative reporting, and so, as Anne said, it began a 5-year journey down this rabbit trail, if you will, at times, pulling all this information, and we felt this was a very important story to tell. For the community and for everybody, that there is some, as I say, it's a real cautionary tale about making sure for anybody they're moving into a retirement complex or is moving a loved one into a retirement complex, that we feel that this exposes some questions that we feel they really need to ask about the safety. Do they have a culture of safety in those places?
What was your Go ahead, Anne.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, the San Francisco Chronicle reviewed our book, and they said of Inflamed, their findings are a lesson to other care facilities. Here's what's not to do.
Right.
And I think that's just this is why it's a bigger story than just one complex in Northern California.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have anything to this scale here in Michigan. But about 10 years ago, we did have a facility. Again, it was memory care assisted, not regulated, really no oversight. And they were warned by the state when the state would go in and do an inspection on this, that, or the other. And midnight staff were documenting. They were doing room checks. They were doing this. They were doing that. And a lady actually fell in the bathroom and laid there for over 8 hours before anybody ever knew it. And I mean, she went to the emergency room, and the emergency room then notified the state because they said there's no way she should be in this condition, at this point. And they actually called all families. They put it on the radio, TV, 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. today. The facility is being locked and barricaded. Your loved one needs to be out. And I mean, there was no warning to the family or anything, but it was that severe. And no, I feel like it's a cautionary tale no matter where you live at, and just especially for people who are looking into maybe choosing that option for their loved one, If I may,
you had talked about the power of this. I mean, the assisted living alone is a $37 billion industry in this nation, and there's a huge, very powerful lobby that pushes back against any attempts at reform.
Well, that was
and one of the key ones is, one of the key issues is that that there's no requirement for backup generators. One of the challenges they had at this Villa Capri is that when the power went out, the elevators stopped working, and they had no way to get the wheelchair bound residents down from the stairs, and it was very difficult. And in Florida, there is a requirement that nursing homes, these kinds of places, have backup generators, but there's been attempts to have that in California, and so far those have been resisted. So those have not been successful.
And go ahead, Ann.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, I opened up Michigan Live, the newsfeed today, and there's a story that just the headline: despite horrific conditions, Michigan isn't using its power to revoke nursing home licenses, which speaks to the enforcement.
And it speaks to, like Paul said, billions upon billions of dollars are backing these places. And that leads to my next question. And, Paul, you might want to speak to this. What was the biggest pushback or challenges you faced when you decided, okay, we're going to go from just writing articles about this to really digging in deep and getting on the inside of what really transpired?
Well, the biggest problem we countered was resistance from people willing to talk about it. Some were still traumatized by the events of October 9th, 2017. But many were afraid to talk because the owner of this complex is a very powerful, litigious individual who had a track record of going after people who said cast him in a poor light, if you will. In fact, at the time, my former newspaper, Press Democrat, we were locked in a defamation suit with that this owner had filed against the paper. The paper eventually won, but at the time it was unclear, and it really had a chilling effect in our community about people being willing to come on the record. And even later on, it was demonstrated when he launched. He settled with the district attorney for $500,000, and then launched a $1.7 million recall campaign against that very district attorney 50 days later. And that had a real chilling effect on people wanting to say or investigate him further. And so that was the biggest concern. And a lot of people warned us, including the district attorney, about not looking into this, that he was going to go after us. And we did. We hired a First Amendment attorney to review our draft of our book. He gave us some feedback. We heavily document everything. Much of it is based on privileged information, transcripts, court deposition, court records, emails, all kinds of. We attribute everything in the book. That's why we have 50 pages of endnotes at the end. That was really the biggest concern, so we have not heard anything as yet, but you never know.
Well, that was going to be my question. Were you ever threatened before, during, or after by this gentleman?
Well, I will say, and I'll go to Ann in a second, we did reach out repeatedly to Oakmont Senior Living and personally to the principal owner of the corporation, Bill Gallagher, who actually was a Santa Rosa native, and Bill started his contracting business here in the community. And at one point, they agreed to sit down and talk with us more. They declined opportunities to respond to many of our questions. At one point, they did agree to a sit-down meeting, but only with Ann. They didn't want me there because they still associated me with the Press Democrat and didn't want to talk to me. So I'll let Ann describe that meeting.
Oh, they did sit down with you then, Ann?
They sat down with me for 2 hours. They didn't want me to take notes or record anything. They basically told me they would not participate in the book at all. And they felt like they were kind of getting, I think their point of view is, hey, nobody could foresee a fire of this magnitude. Nobody knew this was coming. But as we document in the book, less than half a mile away from Villa Capri, there was another senior care, a Brookdale assisted living facility where the executive director had a very well-trained staff that rushed there. She had told them, if you hit a roadblock, blow through it and take the ticket. She made the call on her own. She didn't wait for emergency services. One of the things we heard from Oakmont managers was, well, hey, police didn't come and tell us to evacuate. Well, she got up on the roof, this other executive director, she looked at where the fire was. She said, we're out of here. But she had a contract with the transportation company. Early on, she called, she ordered the buses to a certain type of buses that would be easier for residents to get into. She got their medications down and ready to load. She had 3 printouts of every name, knew which resident was going on which bus. At Villa Capri and Varenna, residents ended up in 5 different shelters, one in a couple in hospitals. Some of the memory care people ended up at an evacuation shelter, not knowing, wrapped in sheets. They were missing their glasses, their hearing aids, their teeth. They didn't have medication. They couldn't even answer that they were residents of Villa Capri. So, and these people, everyone who survived that was, if you have a parent with dementia, you understand how difficult it is to change where they live. And these people lost not only their heirlooms and all of their possessions, but everything that was familiar to them and all their friends. Their community of friends just disappeared overnight. Whereas at Brookdale, they had a place to take them. They had a meeting place. They had a plan. Basically, they had a plan and they had trained their staff to the plan. And they trained their night staff at night when they were working, not expecting them to come in during the day. So we do contrast what happened then, what happened nearby, with what happened at Villa Capri and Varenna.
It's textbook of what to do and what not to do.
What not to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Unbelievable.
And the other, if I may, that was outrageous to family members is the way Oakmont Senior Living tried to portray that everything was fine, everything was under control, but the reality is they didn't know where the medications were. As Ann said, many of these residents didn't, who were rescued, didn't have glasses, many cases didn't have clothes. And they were telling family members that, oh, everything's fine. And we even have a documented case where a couple of them where family members received calls from Oakmont Senior Living telling them, oh, yeah, your mom is fine. She's with us here at a facility in Concord. And the family member says, well, that's funny because my mother's sitting here right next to me. And there's a pause on the line. And the woman says, well, thank God she's safe. This just kind of encapsulates what Oakmont Senior Living was like in these days afterward, that it was just fighting to know what was true and what they were trying to cast as true. And I do want to point out that, yes, they posted this website where they cast their version of alternative facts of what happened that night, their version of the truth. And they were eventually forced to take it down because there were so many misrepresentations of what actually happened that day.
That's called fake news, right, Paul?
Yeah.
That classified as fake news, absolutely.
I want to.
I actually had a pair of sisters who were quoted in a testimonial on that website, and after that, they read the book, and then they said, "We could not believe that in the book there's a testimonial purportedly to be from us. We never wrote it. They didn't know everything their mother had gone through, but they're like, we didn't write this testimonial that they put on the website."
Wow.
So it appears that they were making up testimonials praising their evacuation of the building.
Unbelievable. I want to go to Beth here, and Beth, your mother was a victim of this situation. And before I get to my question, and obviously it also led you to become a senior safety advocate as a consequence of what she went through. When you read the book, or you participate in these interviews, or you hear about it, what are your feelings like now compared to what they were like back then?
Gosh, I'd like to say that I feel a lot better about all that happened now. I'm still as angry today as I was the day I found out what happened.
Yeah.
And it's going on 7 years. So, yeah, it's been a hard time, and I just feel like who's speaking for the victims, for all the seniors that were left to die that night. That's why I appreciate what Ann and Paul have done, because they brought a light, they shine a light on something that everyone needs to know about. So back when I moved my mom into Villa Capri in April of 2017, she'd been failing. She was over medicating. She was isolated and lonely. She stopped driving. And I thought, where can I have her where she'll be safe and she can thrive? So in California anyway, you can do a skilled nursing if you really need a lot of help. You can do assisted living in the middle, or independent living if you're really independent. And I decided assisted living was where she should be. Did all my research, and I found Villa Capri to be the best one a mile from my house. On a waiting list, she moved in April with a horrible transition. She did not like a med tech managing her medications because she wanted to self-medicate. And she was angry, and it was really hard. I was with her almost every day. But I tell Ann and Paul that on October 7th, I'd have lunch with her every Saturday. And that day, October 7th, she finally said, this is going to be my home now. I'm happy now. And the next day, the whole place burned down and she was left to die. So yeah, I think now I even have dug my heels in more about trying to get, and Ann and Paul have heard me say this a million times. I have three goals the last 7 years. One is to get accountability from the owner of this company and his management team, who put greed well over care for these seniors, and then to get acknowledgement for the heroes who saved my mom and everyone else, and then to get lasting change as far as legislation, finally some decent, meaningful legislation, so this won't happen to anyone else's mom again.
When I asked you that, I personally would be angrier, because the more you get to think about it, and the more these obvious just situations of neglect and dereliction of duty and everything else, it would be very hard to cope with that, just knowing how they put that greed, and they're not trying to take responsibility for something that obviously they're responsible for. What does that accountability from them look like for you? What would be a satisfactory accountability? Just acknowledging it and apologizing, or what? How could they rectify that with you?
Well, at this point, I can't even imagine them rectifying it, but a step in the right direction would be to admit it. And they did, because there was a civil case, and then there was the criminal case, there was the DSS case. And each time they, in my opinion, they lied and they did not tell the truth. But when push came to shove and they had to settle, they finally had to admit that, yes, maybe we didn't do what we should have done. The heroes have never been acknowledged, thanked at all. And they risked their life to save my mother. Yeah. And the other 23 that were left literally half naked in the lobby, in their wheelchairs, as the building was on fire. Yeah. So admitting it would be great. They still can't admit it. They only admit it when they're actually legally have to admit it. I think they should do something to thank the heroes who saved everyone. And they should write a letter of "I'm so sorry" to each of the victims' family. A lot of those victims are not alive anymore, unfortunately. So yeah, to me, at this point, I don't see them getting any redemption. One thing they could do is decide to lead the way and change their policies and say, you know what, we're going to have an on-site emergency generator in every of our facilities in California to make sure we're doing all we can to keep this from happening again. And they will not do that, because I think of this as like the Venn diagram or the the mixture of, climate-related disasters along with an aging population, and all around that is just corporate greed. And it's really all about, they'd rather make an extra dollar or two than hire a couple extra staff or do an actual training every quarter or every 6 months on the night shift to make sure people know how to evacuate. Because these disasters seem to mainly hit in the middle of the night. So yeah, there's a lot they could do to redeem themselves, and I personally don't see them doing it. But I'd sure welcome that in any other facility or any other ownership group that wants to step forward and be an example. I'm all here to help them do that.
Before I go to my next question for you, Beth, the civil trial, there was obviously a financial settlement, correct?
There was.
Yeah. What was the outcome of the criminal case? Did anybody get any serious consequence, or what was involved with the criminal?
My understanding, and Ann and Paul can chime in, they had a fine, and Oakmont Senior Living had to pay a fine, and they had to make some changes for a finite amount of time. I believe it was 3 years. And that was it. So, But just being held to account still made this person who owns Oakmont Senior Living try to recall our DA because he was so angry that anyone held him to account.
Yeah.
He does not like being held to account.
Right. Now you're involved with advocacy for senior safety, as we've mentioned. What's been your experience like trying to get something accomplished in that route?
It's been challenging. I started in 2018, and I first thought, okay, I want to make sure this never happens again. So I found a forum from my local state senator, who's Senator Mike McGuire. He's currently pro tem of California. This is his district where the fire happened. And I tried for 8 months to get a meeting with him, and I finally did. And I took the heroes with me, Mark Allen and Kathy Allen, and sat for a half hour, told them what happened. I got a form. I filled it out as far as what I thought needed to happen as far as new legislation. And when I left the meeting, he said, this is so important. He said all the right things. Well, now it's 2024 and nothing's happened. So I met with him another time. I've met with some other legislators back in 18 and 19. Then I have a couple great organizations in California. Californians for Nursing Home Reform and the California Association of Retired Americans. They have been helping me a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. I've had meetings with legislators in California who are in fire-prone and disaster-prone areas who care about senior issues. So I've made more progress recently. It shouldn't take this long, and it shouldn't be this hard. So my initial proposal, which was a little bit pie in the sky, it was for mandatory evacuation plans, mandatory trainings and drills with not just staff, but residents, and permanent on-site generators. So working with these organizations, they said, you need to make it singular. So for the last 3 years, my proposal has been simply to have on-site emergency generators at each assisted living facility. And I'm working, again, with these groups, and I've had meetings with 5 different senators in the state of California, and I've done my research talking to 4 different manufacturers of these. And so it would cost $300,000 to buy and about $20,000 a year to maintain. And everyone tells me, no, the lobby group, which is California Assisted Living Association, they'll never allow them to spend $300 on a piece of equipment like that and $20,000 a year. But when you look at how much money they make, when they told me that, I actually laughed before I cried, because you've got to be kidding me. What price tag do you put on a human life who can't even walk for themselves when disaster strikes? So anyway, I'm still working on it. I feel really confident. And with Ann and Paul writing the book, because back in the day in 2018, all I wanted was the story to be told, because every case kept settling out of court because Oakmont didn't want the story told. And I was looking for someone to tell the story when I learned of Ann Belden, and we met for coffee. And I'm like, oh, you're my savior. You're going to tell the story. So having the story out there and having your listeners hear what happened can only help my desire to get legislation in California, but my goal is national legislation. Because this, you have skilled nursing, which is very well regulated. Assisted living is in that middle ground where it's just a huge cash cow for the owners, and something major needs to change. And with the book being out, to me, this is the time to get that change to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Walk us through real quickly, Beth, when you first discovered the crisis that was happening at your mom's facility. Was it a phone call? Did you look out the window? When did you discover there's something seriously wrong?
Well, my husband and I live, as the crow flies, a mile from where my mom lived. And about 4 in the morning, my husband woke me up and we started hearing these loud explosions. They were transformers blowing up, and we smelled smoke, and we heard car doors slamming. So my husband looked outside, turned on the radio. He's like, "There's a fire." And my husband had an experience when he was a child with a fire that some of his relatives didn't live through. And he said, "You have 10 minutes, we're evacuating." So I called my sister, who lives a mile from me, and I said, "We're evacuating. Do you want to follow us? There's a big fire. We don't know anything else." Because it was mass hysteria in this town. This hadn't happened. Well, it happened 100 years before, but it hadn't happened in our lifetimes. So we filled the car with our dogs and our stuff, and we head out. And my sister said, "Should we go check on mom?" And I said, "Well, no, she's in assisted living." They had her off that hill hours before any danger would have thought about coming close. So we're not going up there. She would want us to take care of ourselves. We're driving south to get out of harm's way. So later that morning, my sister got a phone call from a Red Cross volunteer at one of the shelters saying, "Here's your mom." And so we asked my mom what happened, and she said, "Well, there was a fire, and the whole town," she said, the whole effing town is burning down, and some nice people brought us down the stairs, and they took us to the shelter." So the next day, when I sat with my mom and she told me really what had happened, that's when I started to get so irate, because I thought, this is the opposite of what should have happened. You were in a place that pledged to care for you, and they did the opposite. They left you to die.
Beth, is there, for anybody watching or listening, if they wanted to reach out to you or learn more about your advocacy or even help support it, where would you like them to go?
That's a great idea. I can just give you my email address if they want to reach out.
Go ahead if you want to share it.
It's my first and last name, bethsteffy@gmail.com.
That's
BETHSTEFFY@gmail.com. I welcome any help. Again, from Ann and Paul writing the book, it's helped me so much. I have made connections with people in all different parts of the senior safety world. And so I just feel like now is the time. And actually, my mom passed last month. So I'm even more, I was doing this for her the last 7 years, but really for every senior who might not even have a family member. A lot of folks in these facilities, they don't have daughters who can fight on their behalf. So I'm fighting on everyone's behalf. So anyone who wants to help or has advice, please send it my way, because after I get generators required, I have a list of other things. Why are people that can't walk on the second floor of these facilities? That makes no sense. They want to make them pretty. They want all the pretty areas downstairs. Why isn't there mandated how many staff to resident ratio? And why isn't there a mandated evacuation plan and drills? So there's so many other things on my list, but I'm starting with generators. And to me, that should be an easy sell. It's been 7 years of effort and not yet, but it'll happen. I'm confident.
I don't doubt you at all, Beth. I would just say, when you look at it, I think one of the issues that could really resolve some things, not everything, of course, is if assisted living was regulated and fell under, the government. Because I know here in Michigan, we're one of the few states where home care is not regulated or mandated. And it's terrifying. I have to hire a plumber who's licensed to come in my home to fix a leaky faucet. But if you're hiring a home care company to come in and take care of an elderly person who may be not, coherent, may not be able to advocate for themselves, or just they're frail because they're elderly and they're handling their medications, they're around all of their things, but there's no oversight, and that's equally as terrifying, So keep up the work. We support you. And you had your question?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that Florida actually has a generator law, and it stemmed from 2017, shortly before the Tubbs fire hit Santa Rosa. There was Hurricane Irma hit Florida, and 12 nursing home residents died. Not in the hurricane itself, but in the days after, when the power was out and the air conditioning was out and the temperatures inside rose. And some of the people who died had body temperatures of 110 degrees. And so Florida, after this tragedy, enacted a generator law for their senior care facilities. And so I feel like if Florida can pull that off, other states should as well. And I think there just needs to be a shift to a culture of safety rather than a culture of profit.
Absolutely. You, Anne, you and Paul were both had or have aging parents when you were researching and writing this book. How did that affect your outlook on it and your research and just your approach to the book? If you guys wouldn't mind sharing that.
Yeah, well, I feel like Paul and I were each other's support group for quite a while because he was the person in his family in charge of caring for his mom, and I was caring for my father, and overseeing their care in assisted living. It was, and then both of us lost that parent during this writing process. But I think what it did for me is it really humanized the issue. My dad was very important to me, and I could see that all of the seniors I wrote about had families and people who loved them and friends and lives. And I think seniors are kind of looked at in our society, like people just kind of brush them aside. Oh, they've lived their life, and I think it's important that to understand that they are people with feelings and fears and should not, and that they deserve better than this.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Paul?
Interesting thing is my mother actually had a deposit down to move into Varenna as it was being built. And so I actually met Bill Gallagher and his wife, Cindy Gallagher, in the dining hall. And we were very excited about her moving there because we were impressed by, as many people, by the furniture and the dining hall and everything. It was a beautiful setting. But my mom had some reservations about it. She wasn't feeling it was safe to be, it's on this ridge just north of Santa Rosa, and she kind of wanted to be closer to family. And so she ended up deciding to move to another retirement complex, and I couldn't be more happy about that. Yeah, I think writing this as we had aging parents, we were asking all the same questions that we feel everybody should be asking about the safety culture of the places we have our loved ones living and where we may live someday. And our feeling is that as we looked more into this, we realized that so many of these places did not have the evacuation plans, did not have the safety measures in place to really assure these people are cared for in times of emergency. And here in California, we've had 8 of our 10 most devastating firestorms, deadliest firestorms in the past 6 years. And so we see that it's a big threat in California, but these, as I said, these natural disasters are happening more frequently, and our sense is, we need to be careful about where we locate these. About a third of the retirement complexes in California are located in wildfire risk areas, and that's understandable. They're often in forested areas or places with nice views. But our contention is if we're going to continue to place our retirement complexes or assisted living, independent places in these kinds of locations, we need to make sure that they have the planning, resources, evacuation routes, and plans in place to make sure that when and if a natural catastrophic event does occur, that they're the first rescued, not the last. And we see too often these cases, our seniors are so often the casualties in these events.
Yeah, Anne.
Yeah, I would add that I had to evacuate my father from he was in smaller, like 6-person board and care, known as board and care assisted living places, and two different ones, and in 2 different fires, I had to go pick him up because they really didn't have They didn't have a plan, including during the Tubbs fire when he was in an area that could be next to be evacuated. So I saw firsthand that it's not just the big places, it's the little ones too. And a lot of people prefer having a smaller facility for their parents, but you still have to ask the same questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go, and I just want to thank you all again for your time today. We'll have a link for purchasing the book. I got my copy right here. Have not made it all the way through yet, but it's an incredible story for good reasons and bad, right? It's bad because you can't imagine that people responsible for the safety of others would ever let or allow something like this to happen. But it's good in the sense that we hopefully will learn from it so that these mistakes won't be repeated in the future. But for you, all three of you, and I'm going to start with Beth. It's a two-part question, Beth. How did the situation change you? I think I know your answer. But two, what would you want others that are listening or watching this to take away from this story?
Well, I think for me, I've just become a lot more determined to get change made because I'm a fan of Jon Stewart, and he used to have the Daily Show. I guess he's back now, but when he went off the air years ago, the last thing he said was, if there's something going on in the world that you're not happy about, don't complain about it, just do something about it. And that's been in my mind the last 7 years. That if not me, I mean, maybe no one else would. So I'm more determined to get change to happen, to shine a light. And also, it just feels like our whole country is like, we need to just elevate seniors. I mean, they created us, and they have stories to tell, and they get to the point where they can't care for themselves. And it's so sad that we don't seem to have the priority that we should. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and what would you want a reader or listener or a viewer to take away from the book themselves? What would you hope they take away from it?
Well, I hope they take away that if they're going to put their loved one in a facility, they ask the right questions up front, and they find out what the history is of that facility. So anyone in California moving into an Oakmont facility, they should ask what the history is. Google them. See if they've been through something like this. See if maybe they left 24 of their charges to die as the building was on fire. So just to do the research. The book is so well written. It reads like a novel, but it all happened, and there's so many lessons to be learned. But I think it's just to educate ourselves and do the research before you put anyone you love in any facility, because they can look all pretty on the outside, but that isn't always, the care does not necessarily shine through.
Correct. Absolutely. How about for you, Paul?
Well, two things. One, at its heart, I think this is a story about, it's a very personal story, I think, about what is it that drives people to step up in a time of crisis and do the right thing, and save and help people that they may or may not even know. And by the same token, what is it that causes some people to flee their responsibilities? And I find myself sometimes asking that question: what would I do in that situation? I really admire these people, and I'm so thankful to these people who are willing to share their stories with us. Many of them didn't really want to. They as Beth has pointed out, they were never acknowledged. They were never fully thanked. And when we did our book launch in Santa Rosa in October of last year, we had some of them on stage, and we introduced them. We had them tell some of their stories, and there were a lot of tears that night. But at the end of the night, we had over 200 people in that audience, and all of them stood up and gave them a standing ovation. And it still gives me chills to think about, because that's what we wanted. We wanted them to be recognized. But the second part, we also want this story to be told, because we do feel there's so many lessons here about what we can do and what we should be doing. And we hope, and I'm very grateful to hear that we have some retirement communities, including one I just spoke with down in Portola Valley, down in the Bay Area, that is using our book as a model to reform some of their oversight measures. They have senior councils there in this retirement complex, and they're using our book as ways to upgrade how enforce changes within their communities, their retirement communities, to ensure they have the evacuation plans and training in place, the support for when and if a disaster happens.
That's wonderful. How about for you personally? How has this experience changed you?
Well, this was a difficult thing. This was a difficult book to write because every weekend, Ann and I both have full-time jobs. We have kids. We have aging parents. We wrote this while we had 3 more evacuations in the years that followed from other fires: Glass Fire, Wall Bridge Fire, Kincaid. Plus, we had the pandemic, and yet each weekend, Ann and I and our I want to give credit to our copy contributing writer, copy editor Lauren Spates, who really helped us get across the finish line. But every weekend, it was hard to crawl back into this and relive those tense hours of this fire. And yet, it was a story that we wanted to tell. These people had trusted us to tell it, and we were committed to getting it out. So we're very grateful for the response we're getting. We're very grateful to you to helping us air this story. And it's great. This is what we were hoping for. We wanted to get this story out because I felt it was an important one to have everybody hear. And like we said, we hope that this will bring about change. So I'm very proud of the recognition, but more than anything, I'm so gratified by the response we're getting to it, not just some of the awards, but also just the discussions that it's triggered, because everybody wants to help in some way or spread the word, and we're so thankful for that. That's what we were hoping for.
Absolutely. And who's going to play you in the movie?
I don't know. I think I'm some days I was more of an Ed Asner character. I don't even know, I was the grumpy editor, but newspaper guy. But I'll George Clooney and see if he's available.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Beth, thank you so much. And we'll close with you. How has this changed you, and what are you hoping viewers, listeners, and readers will take away from the book?
Well, I have to say this is the hardest thing I've ever done. I have, like Paul, a big day job and parents now. I'm my mother. It has some memory issues. I don't want to go too much into that, but I am handling her finances and everything like that. So it was very difficult to dive into such a heavy topic. And as Paul said, I remember writing fire chapters while we had 2 active fires in the county, and we had smoke outside our window, just really so bad that the air quality was so bad you really couldn't go outside. And we were having to dive into these fire chapters. So on a personal level, it was difficult. It was very difficult. And I do want to reiterate that Lauren Spates, our contributing author / editor, really helped us kind of weave the story together. I would echo what Beth and Paul said, that this is a cautionary tale. It's the intersection of this booming for-profit assisted living business or industry, the baby boomers retiring at 10,000 per day, and climate change, which is where we're finding bigger and badder climate disasters hitting places that have never seen them before. And I want people to take notice and to ask the right questions for their family members and advocate for a culture of safety in assisted living, be they small, medium, large places everywhere. We want to change the culture, and we want these places to be safer. One other thing I would say about the book is that it does read like a novel. It is a narrative structure, and we've won some awards. We just, in June, we were in Los Angeles accepting the Investigative Reporters and Editor Book of the Year Award for Investigative Journalism. We were just a finalist for a Northern California Book Award, and we've won a National Indie Excellence Award. We've gotten some really good reviews, excellent reviews. We have a starred review by Kirkus Reviews, and the San Francisco Chronicle gave us a stellar review. So in addition to the lessons you can take from it, it's also a very good book to read.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And got to ask you, who plays you in the movie?
Oh, Sandra Bullock. It's got to be Sandra Bullock.
Well, I'm sure we'll close here, but have you been contacted, or has there been any discussions about a potential movie? Because it's the scene is set for, I think, a pretty incredible movie.
We've always seen it as a movie. We have been in talks with a documentary filmmaker, but we could really see a movie made of this. Yeah. It's got all the elements for a movie, and it would get the word out even more.
Where would we'll put it in the show notes and up on the screen, but for people listening right now, where would you like them to go if they would like to learn more or to purchase a copy of the book?
So they can purchase at bookshop.org or Amazon. Amazon, the book is in Kindle format, Audible or audio format. We selected a narrator. It's so you can download it as an audiobook or read it as a hard copy book. You can contact us directly. We have
Inflamed the book on our Facebook page is the best way to get the latest information.
Yeah, and we have a Facebook page, facebook.com/inflamed the book. And we also have a Gmail address, inflamedthebook@gmail.com. I am double checking that right now.
Okay.
Hold on one sec.
That's it.
Let me is that it? Yeah. Okay, so we also have an email address, inflamedthebook@gmail.com, that people can contact us about events, movie deals, anything.
All right. Well, Beth Steffy, Paul, you got something?
Oh, I was just going to say, if there is anybody out there interested in helping make this into a movie, we can put them in contact with our agent, and so just reach out to us at that address, inflamedthebook@gmail.com.
Perfect. All right. Well, Paul Gullixson, Ann Belden, Beth Steffy, I just want to thank the three of you for sharing this story and for the advocacy you're doing on such a critically important issue that affects everyone everywhere. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to continuing to help support you guys however we can.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms, or you can watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. I'd also like to say thank you again to the authors of the book, Inflamed, Ann Belden and Paul Gullixson, along with Beth Steffy, a daughter of a victim from that tragic situation.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.